Howdy my totally as always, Tubular Gamers, and we're back with you guessed it, another ranking video, and today we're talking Nickelodeon crossover games. Now Nickelodeon does not need an introduction, especially not in the world of video games. There have been dozens upon dozens of video games featuring Nickelodeon characters, but today we're really talking about specifically the Nickelodeon crossover games. Over the years there's been tons of Nickelodeon crossover games. From the late 90s all the way to even nowadays, there's been tons of Nickelodeon crossover games. We very recently got Nickelodeon AllStar Brawl 2, and I'm going to give a shout out to the publisher for a review code. Thank you very much. That is appreciated. But yeah, we've had tons of different crossover games through the years. You know, I very much remember the Nicktoons Unite series from the 2000s. I played all of those back in the day, but it's great to see that Nickelodeon crossover games have not died out. We're still getting them. And so yeah, that's really what we're covering today. We're going to be ranking all of the Nickelodeon crossover games from worst to best, giving each one of them a little review, stacking them up against each other, seeing how they all are when you're comparing them, seeing which ones are worth playing, which ones are worth avoiding, which ones are just total shovelware, etc. Now, when it comes to what we're looking at in these games, you know, the gameplay, the story, the characters, which Nicktoons are actually here. Is it a good cast? Are they represented well? And is the game even any fun? That's really what we're looking at today. Now, like I mentioned, you know, there's plenty of Nickelodeon crossover games. However, a couple of these games do have different versions, and some of these versions are drastically different from each other. For instance, Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island on GameCube is very different from the Game Boy Advance version, and I'm gonna just be upfront, I have not played all of these versions, you know. I've played the home console or PC version for all of these games, and that's really why I called it. And so if you're really looking for someone to cover even the handheld versions of these games, well, I'm sorry, that's not going to be today's video. I mean, it's long enough as it is. Maybe one day in the future, as these handheld versions do seem pretty decent, but not today. I also want to say, as per usual with my list, there's no mobile games on here. I know there's plenty of Nickelodeon crossover mobile games. No mobile games, no browser games, no flash-based games, no plug-and-play games, no educational games or Leapster, Leapfrog learning games. And I'm not covering the 3D Movie Maker Director's Lab game or the Activity Center for the PC. Those are a little too adjacent to educational games, and they're barely even games at all. And lastly, I want to give a shout out to Nicktoons Movin' on PS2. I'm unable to play this game as it does require the iToy to play. If you don't remember the iToy, well, you're really not missing much. This game doesn't seem like it's worth getting an iToy for. I don't have one, and I don't plan on getting one. So besides all the games I just mentioned, we really are looking at all the Nickelodeon crossover games. Trust me, there are still plenty to go over. Really, we're looking at all the home console games and a few PC games. So now that we set the stage and had a long-ass intro, let's just get right into it. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. As always, this is just my opinion. There might be some hot takes, some cold takes. Let me know how you're feeling down below. We also got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support truly is greatly appreciated. Subscribe if you want to see more lists. And with all that out of the way, the big question comes, you know, of all the Nickelodeon crossover games, which one is the worst? I think the worst of all the Nicktoons games is Nicktoons Basketball, releasing for the PC in 2004. Now, this game was released as a very budget, cheap licensed kids game, released again only for the PC, that was probably developed in 6 months or less, that you would find on an end cap in a Walmart. Like, this game wasn't exactly given the tools for success, if you catch what I'm saying. And unfortunately, I never got to try this game as a kid. This was my first time trying it, was for this video, and yikes. Now, when it comes to basketball games, I'm not exactly well versed. You know, I loved Mario Hoops on the DS, and I played NBA Street on GameCube, but that was it. You won't catch me playing any of those 2K basketball games, and you're really not going to catch me playing a basketball game after this, because this game is just terrible. I mean, first off, just look at it. This game actually looks like a shitpost, one you'd see in the late 2000s, especially with the clashing art styles. And then none of the art styles look good either, not even decent. How do you mess up not one, but multiple art styles? Budget or not, this just looks terrible, and the gameplay is not any better. Use the mouse really for everything. You can use the keyboard, but the mouse really is the best, and you just kind of click all over the place. And emphasis on try to play some basketball, you know, passing the ball back and forth, stealing it from your opponents and scoring points. And again, you use the mouse for everything, so you really are just clicking everywhere, hoping that the AI doesn't steal the ball from you, and just trying to win. The controls and general gameplay are simplistic, but at the same time, time unintuitive. Like, it doesn't feel great, it's kind of confusing, it's all over the place, but once you play it even a few minutes, you realize just truly how simplistic the controls and general gameplay is. I mean, you just play really basic basketball. There's about as much depth as a puddle you'll find in the Mojave Desert, aka none. At least when it comes to the character roster, it is pretty decent. You know, SpongeBob and the gang show up, Jimmy Neutron has a couple characters, and then they throw in some oddball bonuses like all grown up Tommy Pickles is here. We got Reggie from Rocket Power, Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot, and Tack for some reason is here. So that's good. And the intro cutscene, you know, it's not the worst intro I've ever seen. But yeah, when it comes to Nicktoons basketball and positives, I really don't got much to say. I mean, you can look at this game for 5 seconds and understand the kind of game or level of quality that this game is at. And it's not like some hidden gem that needs to be remastered or anything even close to that. You know, I know some people might have nostalgia for this game. I do not. And all I can say is I wish y'all played better games as kids and not this, because this is not good. And here we have Nickelodeon Party Blast releasing in 2002. Now, I very much remember as a small child seeing this game on the shelf at Hollywood Video to rent or buy at Game Crazy, and I just never pulled the trigger, and neither did any of my family members, and thank God nobody did, because this game is just terrible. I didn't even realize it until I was making this video. This is like the lowest rated Nickelodeon game of them all, and you know, I'd rather play this over the basketball game, but just barely, man. This game is just yikes, yikes, yikes. This is really one of the worst party games ever made. This game makes Pac-Man Fever, Crash Bash, shit, even Crash Boom Bang look good, and none of those games are good. Okay, maybe sometimes Pac-Man Fever is cooking, but this game is not cooking. It is doing the opposite of whatever cooking is. I guess going to sleep. You know, I'd rather go to sleep than play this game anymore. I didn't play much of this game, and I still feel like I wasted my time. So the game is a party game. You know, Cat Dog are the hosts of said party game. You get to choose one of 8 characters in terms of the roster. You got Rugrats, Invader Zim, SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, Rocket Power, Wild Thornberrys, and Hey Arnold. Not the worst roster by any means. Not great, but it's there. And really, they're just all going up against each other in a bunch of party games. Now, unlike, say, SpongeBob Lights Camera Pants or Mario Party, there's not double digits when it comes to the party mini games. There's like 6. We got the food fight, the pipe challenge, the squirt and splash. Oh god, I hope this video doesn't get demonetized. The rollerball, the coin rally, and Goose Squirter mini games. Yeah, we're getting demonetized. And you know, all of these mini games do play slightly different from each other, but they all have a couple things in common. They play horrible, they control terribly, and the sound is just awful in this game, no matter which mini game you're playing. Like, these are some of the most dull, uninteresting, basic, boring, generic, cookie cutter mini games I've ever seen in a game. The controls are somehow unresponsive, clunky, stiff, and it's just not fun to play any of these. And as for the mini games themselves, you know, they're unoriginal, they're not creative, they're not interesting, they're not challenging, they're just there. And you know, I'd really rather be playing like any other party game than this. This just sucks. And then the sound, the less said about it, the better. It just sounds terrible. The game is super annoying with all the characters going off, and it's not good lines like other Nickelodeon games. It's just them making noises, and I really just wanted to turn this game off really quick. The presentation sucks, the gameplay sucks, the controls suck. This game just sucks. Avoid this game, avoid the basketball game, and you know, it's games like these that really make me reevaluate what I'm doing with my life, what I'm spending my time on. I could have been playing something great like finishing Alan Wake or playing more Mario Wonder, or maybe get around to doing that Prince of Persia video I've been trying to do, but instead I played this game and talked about it, and you know, I'm just feeling sad for myself now, so I'm just going to stop. Avoid this game. Please, just avoid it. And so here we have Nicktoons Winners Cup Racing releasing for the PC in 2006. Now, I actually did get this game, like way back when I was a kid. I actually found it in the clearance area of a Home Depot. I could not make this up. It really was at the Home Depot. And what is this game, you'll probably ask? Well, it is what Nickelodeon fans have really always wanted. It's finally that hardcore racing sim that we've waited forever for. Okay, it's not that. It is the definition of budget shovelware, just kind of garbage that was thrown out on the PC in the 2000s that have some of our Nickelodeon characters here. It is a racing game, I think. Yes, I can confirm still there is racing in this game. There are some other game modes here that are not as traditional with their racing. Who are you going to play as in this game? Well, you have a really interesting roster, as there's SpongeBob, Jimmy, Timmy, and Danny Phantom and their respective villains, and that's it. A bunch of classic characters like Patrick are not here. Or that really obscure Jimmy Neutron character known as Sheen is not here. I do not know why the roster just kind of sucks. As a kid, I was always really confused by this as well. Now, when it comes to the driving, it is quite abysmal. It controls, it's just awful when it comes to its controls, actually. Like, there's really just nothing good to say here when it comes to the controls. It feels really imprecise, really slow. It feels like the cars are consistently underwater. It just does not have a nice feel to it, and I can't believe even as a kid I slightly enjoyed this, because this controls horribly. And when it comes to the gameplay, the racing and the tracks, it actually reminds me a lot of South Park Rally, and you do not ever want to be compared to South Park Rally. Like, South Park Rally is a little bit of a guilty pleasure of mine, but I know it's shit. I know it absolutely sucks, and this game, it actually plays kind of similar to South Park Rally with how the tracks are laid out, where it's just kind of like they designed this kind of like open area and then made tracks around that open area versus just developing race tracks. So the layout, the track design, and all of the navigation just feels really disjointed. There's this ugly arrow all over the ground. There's a bunch of arrows all over the ground just telling you where to go, and it's just not a satisfying experience, like, at all. And then there's like these other challenges with some other modes, and you know what? It's bad. It's bad. It's not fun. It's not satisfying. The game feels incredibly slow and underwhelming, and it really feels like a browser game that got put on a disc. That's really the best way to describe this game. It's incredibly budget. It doesn't really have much going for it. It does have the original voice actors, so there you go, but incredibly poor presentation, even for 06, and it just really, it doesn't have any merit to it in modern day. It doesn't even work on modern computers. I tried it not that long ago because, of course, I've still got my copy from Home Depot. That shit's gold. But what's the saying? One man's gold is another man's trash, or some shit like that. I don't know. This game is trash. That's what I'm trying to say. The game is trash. It's not worth playing, and just skip it. And so here we have Nicktoons Freeze Frame Frenzy, which was released exclusively for the Game Boy Advance in 2004. Now, this is a game I had absolutely no knowledge of before making this video, and you know, I could have been okay with that. I could have lived the rest of my life knowing this game didn't exist, and I would have been totally fine, but that is not the route life has chosen for me. Anyway, Nicktoons Freeze Frame Frenzy is a very interesting kind of game. The story is pretty weird, all things considered. It sees all of our favorite Nicktoons getting thrown into the wrong worlds, and then Jimmy comes up with this camera that basically, when you take a picture of someone, it'll send them back to their correct world, and so it's up to our characters to send everyone back to where they belong. And yeah, that's really the entire story here, and that's how the gameplay is as well. It's an auto scroller where you're just walking left to right, taking pictures. Really is as many things that seem out of place as possible. Sometimes it's obvious, like when you see a SpongeBob character walking around in a Fairly Odd Parents world, and sometimes it's not so obvious. There are like goals you'll get for each level. There's even a boss fight at the end of each level, but really all it amounts to is just taking pictures of stuff, taking pictures of whatever looks out of place. The gameplay is incredibly simplistic. It's really easy to pick up this game, understand how it works, play it, and then it never gets any more exciting or interesting or engaging or challenging than what you see here. This is really the whole game. And to be 100 with you, it gets pretty boring pretty fast. Like, even seeing some of my favorite cartoon characters of all time here couldn't save this game. This is just a really monotonous, tedious game that kind of keeps going on, and I think a small child probably would like it, but anyone over the age of like 6 is going to get bored with it eventually. The thing is I don't even know how I would make this game even any better. I mean, more challenge, more interesting scenarios, more bosses, would that make the game better? Probably not. The game is just kind of fundamentally flawed from the start. And I'm actually surprised with how much I didn't care for this game. I love photography games. Umurangi, new Pokemon Snap, the original Pokemon Snap. I love those games. This game, though, it did not do it for me. At least from a presentation standpoint for the Game Boy Advance, it looks decent enough. It looks better than any of those cheap, ugly PC games you'll find at the Hobby Lobby, so I'll give it that at least. But in the end, I really couldn't recommend this game. If you've got nostalgia for it, well, today I'm ruining everyone's hopes, dreams, memories, nostalgia for some of these games, so get in line, I guess. On to the next game. And here we have Nicktoons MLB releasing for 360 and Wii in 2011. Now, when it comes to baseball games like basketball, I really haven't played many baseball games. I love Wii Sports like everyone else. I love Mario Baseball on GameCube and Wii. And I was part of MLB The Show 22 and 23's production when I was with Sony. So, you know, I was part of the game's development, but I never actually played MLB The Show, funny enough. So this is one of the few MLB games, few baseball games I have played. And you know what? It's not that bad. It's not exactly great or really even all that good, but it's not terrible. It's way better than the basketball game. In fact, compared to the basketball game, this game's like fucking Grapes of Wrath or Ocarina of Time. It's way better than the basketball game, but all in all, I'd say it's a pretty middling experience. I mean, when it comes to the gameplay, it's a baseball game. If you've never played a baseball game, well, I'm not going to explain to you how baseball works. I'll explain to you what like hundreds of Pokemon do, but the moment baseball shows up, that's where I'm drawing the line. It's a baseball game through and through. It follows all the rules of baseball, and it doesn't really do anything all that wacky or have any crazy gimmicks like, say, Mario Baseball does. Whether you're batting, pitching, or catching the ball in the field, it all feels rather generic and standard for any baseball game. Honestly, if none of the Nicktoons characters were here, you could convince me that this was just any old baseball game from like 2010. In fact, sometimes even with the Nicktoons characters, you could still just convince me this is a generic baseball game from 2010. You could tell me it's the Bigs, and I'd say, yeah, it looks like it. I mean, look at it. When none of the Nicktoons characters are on here, this is just some generic looking baseball game. And the Nicktoons characters, well, I don't know if I'd say they look bad. I wouldn't say they look all that great. Animation wise, they're okay, but the 3D is just kind of odd, and it's really clashing with the realistic human beings here. I mean, it just looks weird. It doesn't look terrible, but it just clashes and looks a little strange. But you know, despite how they look, this game actually has a really stacked roster of characters, more so than most Nickelodeon games. Obviously, we've got the classics like SpongeBob, like Danny Phantom, like Invader Zim, Ren and Stimpy even make an appearance, and a couple Avatar characters. But then there's just some strange additions. You know, Planet Sheen shows up, which I really didn't expect. The monkey from that show, Ultra Lord and Sheen are playable. I mean, just the fact that Ultra Lord is playable is pretty hilarious and awesome, but there's other weird ones too, like Larry the Lobster is playable, Tough Puppy, which I did not expect at all, and then Fanboy and Chum Chum are here. I don't know what the fuck this show is. But yeah, they're here and they all, I guess, have different stats, but they all play the same and all feel the same, so it really doesn't matter all that much, but it is still cool to see a bunch of characters that have never shown up in any Nicktoons game make an appearance here. But all this doesn't let this game escape mediocrity. My biggest issue with it, outside of it being just kind of a generic baseball game, is the controls. You know, it uses the Kinect on 360 and it uses motion controls on the Wii, and any game using either of these lives and dies by its controls, and yeah, they're not so great in this game. They're not horrible, they're not the worst I've ever seen, but they're generally a bit unresponsive, imprecise, and just don't really work all that well sometimes. They're just pretty and that's really how I describe this game as a whole. You know, it's not terrible, but it's not very good either, and I couldn't really recommend it to fans of baseball games or Nicktoons. Maybe the 3DS version is better. That one actually has Jimmy in it, but yeah, either way, I can't recommend it. And so here we have the first Nickelodeon kart racers releasing in 2018 for all the consoles at the time. It was developed by Bam Tang Games and published by Game Mill. So this was the first Nick racing game in like 10 years, and so it is a little bit of a step up compared to those older Nickelodeon racing games, but is it all that much better than the older titles? Well, a little bit. Look, maybe I've got a soft spot or I'm being too nice to these games, but I think what we have here is a decent little racing game that is not exceptional. It's not going to make you drop Mario Kart, it's not going to make you drop CTR or even some other licensed racing games, but this first Nickelodeon kart racers, you know, they established a decent formula that they would very much build on in later games. When it comes to the roster, I won't lie to you, it's not great. There's SpongeBob, there's TMNT, Rugrats, and Hey Arnold, and that's it. There's a couple characters from each one, and that's the whole roster. This is something that would greatly be expanded on in other kart racing games because, yeah, that's kind of weak. Like, this was 2018, this was not during a time where there wasn't exactly a ton of iconic Nickelodeon characters. I just think it's kind of weak. I mean, you know, it's cool TMNT's there, but I would have expected more. And also some voice acting. It's a little strange there's like no voice acting here. When it comes to the presentation, you know, it looks very budget, it feels very budget, it is very budget, and so I'm not going to roast it too hard. It's not excellent, it doesn't look great, it doesn't sound great, but you know, it's okay. It's a step above indie games, I'll give it that at least. Now, when it comes to the driving, it's okay. It's just okay, you know, it takes a little bit of time to get used to. It does feel a bit stiff and a bit clunky. It does not feel anywhere near as nice as other racing games that came out around the time, like CTR. But you very much can come to grips with it. It feels a lot more casual than, say, you know, Mario Kart or most kart racing games. It is a very casual feeling driving game, and it could control worse. I can say that it could control worse. At least the game does have a decent sense of speed. It actually does feel like you go kind of fast at some points. The characters actually kind of feel different from each other, which is a positive since there isn't a ton of characters. They all have their own vehicles, which is something the later games would drop. Something else that the later games would improve on is the track design. The track design in this game is okay. It's just okay. It doesn't do anything special. There's really nothing all that memorable or anything above even just or decent. But I wouldn't say any of the tracks are bad. In fact, that's really kind of how I would describe Nickelodeon kart racers in general. It's not good, but it's not bad either. It's just kind of in the middle. It does a few things that are a bit mediocre, and it does a few things that are okay. It doesn't fall into licensed garbage that nobody should ever play, but it doesn't go into oh, this is a hidden gem or some underrated kart racer you've never heard of. It's okay at best. I wasn't expecting greatness. I wasn't even expecting the game to be average at best, but what we have here is a very average standard racing game that would be improved on in later games. And so should you play this first one? No, I don't think this first one is worth playing, but it's good to see where this kart racer series got its start and how much they've actually improved on the series. And here we have Nicktoons Nitro releasing for arcades in 2008. The game was developed by Raw Thrills, who have made plenty of other great arcade racers like Cruisin' Blast. And like almost all of the other games besides Cruisin' Blast, the game is pretty much totally inaccessible these days unless you have some kind of arcade emulation. It's a real shame because this is actually a pretty decent racing game. Sure, there's not a ton to it, but what is here? It's fun. The story is about a bunch of Nicktoons characters getting dragged into one world to then race each other. These characters being SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, Danny Phantom, Timmy Turner, Invader Zim, and Avatar Aang. And you'll go through a couple courses, each of which have some very familiar locations. Obviously there's a Bikini Bottom one, there's an Avatar one, a Fairly Odd Parents one, etc., etc. And at the end, you'll race the big final boss, this guy named Lord Nitro, and then the game's over. If you play through all the courses, it's probably under an hour. But what you have here is a solid little racing experience. The controls, at least on an emulator, seem fine enough. The game has a decent sense of speed. There's items like Mario Kart. The courses, yeah, they all seem fine enough. They don't seem super generic. At least they have some differences between them, and I do like how the game visually looks. In fact, visually, I think the game is pretty decent. For 2008, it looks fine, and out of all the Nicktoons games we're talking about today, this is probably one of the better looking ones, which I don't know if that's just sad or impressive on this game's part, but yeah, visually, I think the game is fine. Look, there's not a ton to talk about with this game. It's an arcade game. It was never meant to be played for more than 10 minutes at a time, if even that. It's a bit rubber bandy. The controls could probably be better. I'm sure there's dozens of other racing games you'd rather play than this one. If you have any interest, any at all, just go figure out how you can play it on a computer and check it out. Otherwise, yeah, you could probably skip it. There's plenty of other Nicktoons racing games that I think are better than this and more worth your time, but at least this one doesn't cost any money these days. If you somehow see it in a Chuck E. Cheese or something, you could play a hell of a lot worse in the arcades, but you're certainly not going to catch me playing this at Chuck E. Cheese. I'd much rather play Cruisin' or Daytona any day. And here we have Nicktoons Racing, but this time we're looking at the console and PC version. Now, I also have some fond memories with this one, and coming back all these years later, this is a decent little racing game for the PS1 that won't wow you, and it doesn't do anything exceptional, but what you have here is a fun little game. The game is a fairly standard kart racer with various Nickelodeon characters and themed tracks. The racing itself, it isn't the furthest from Mario Kart, I'll be the first to say it. It does have items, it does have kind of a drift mechanic, and not really, you just kind of turn really hard, but it does play fairly similar to Mario Kart. The items clearly are nothing special, they kind of are Nickelodeon themed, but they don't have the greatest impact on the racing itself. If you're decent enough at the driving, you'll be just fine here. The items certainly help. Now, when it comes to the driving, I'm not going to say it handles exceptionally well. It doesn't feel amazing. It doesn't feel anywhere near as nice as, say, Mario Kart 64 or Diddy Kong Racing, but it's okay. It can feel a little sluggish. The turning can feel a little slow. In fact, the driving itself can feel quite slow. It's probably one of my bigger issues with this game is that the pacing is a little slow and you don't really have a great sense of speed, but it controls okay. I've certainly seen a lot better though from other licensed racing games at the time, like the Looney Tunes racing game, which I think is much better than this game. But something you won't have in the Looney Tunes racing game is Nickelodeon characters. I mean, that's one of the biggest parts of this game is the Nickelodeon characters racing each other. How is the roster here? You know, for early Nick, I think it's pretty decent. We've got Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, Real Monsters, Hey Arnold, Angry Beavers, which is really an obscure one. I don't think Angry Beavers has been in another Nickelodeon game, period. Cat Dog, Wild Thornberries, which is cool. We've got a couple SpongeBob characters here as well. And this was back when SpongeBob was like new, so this is cool to see. I think the roster, it's decent enough. It's better than the Game Boy Color and Advance versions. Something else that's a lot better is the track design. It's quite a bit more exciting here, and it's just a lot more fun to go through these courses. There's obviously some fan service here, and there's nothing, you know, that's all that well designed or I'm like, wow, that was a really memorable or great track, but it's decent here. The presentation obviously is very budget. No, it didn't look great, especially for 2001, but I mean, it's got a certain charm to it, I won't lie. This game, it's got some fun to it, it's got some issues, you know, the sense of speed isn't great, it doesn't have a ton of content, and it does get kind of old fast, and it isn't the most rewarding experience, but I mean, I didn't question my time when I was with it. It's not like it's all that long. I certainly didn't want it to end immediately like some of the other games here, so I mean, that's always a big plus. I'd rather play this than mine cryptocurrency from a 350 or whatever. Like, you could do worse. I mean, you could do a lot better, but you could certainly do worse. I mean, if you love old Nickelodeon, you love old racing games, and you haven't tried this one, maybe it's worth trying. It's not long at all, but, and so yeah, maybe it would be worth trying. And here we have Nicktoons Unite, which came out in 2005. Now, I very, very much remember playing this game as a kid. I rented it from Hollywood Video, and I remember not actually liking it very much, and coming back to it nowadays, yeah, it's not great, but I still think this game is okay. This game would be the first in the Nicktoons Unite series, which, as the title implies, sees a bunch of Nicktoons uniting together to go up against some greater evil. This was really the first Nickelodeon crossover game with like a real story and cutscenes, rather than them just all getting together to race each other or play basketball or some other random activity. And you know, the story is pretty cool here. It sees SpongeBob, Jimmy, Danny Phantom, and Timmy Turner all teaming up to take on their antagonists respectively. I like the premise, I like the setup, I like the characters interacting with each other, and the dialogue is solid. The voice acting is good work as well. Presentation wise, this game is okay for 2005. You know, it was a bit budget, and it hasn't exactly aged the best, but I would say it's just okay. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, this game is an action-adventure game where you get to play as SpongeBob, Jimmy, Timmy, or Danny at any time. All four are always on screen the entire time. You can switch between them whenever you want. Each of them do have their own special abilities. For instance, Timmy has like a little gun, SpongeBob has karate chops, Danny has the ghostly whale, etc. Again, you can switch between them whenever you want, but you can also have other people join you and then they'll play as them. I think this game's probably a lot better in co-op. I think it was designed with a cooperative experience in mind, but I've always played solo. I know, get out the world's smallest violin, whether it was 2005 or current year. Nobody wants to play with Jonathan on Nicktoons Unite. My life sucks.
Oh, boo-hoo. Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
But anyway, you can switch between them whenever you want. They've all got special abilities. You'll beat up a bunch of enemies. You'll solve some really basic puzzles and go through a couple levels for about 3 to 5 hours, and then the game's over. Along the way, you might even do some really basic platforming. There's also bosses that show up. The bosses usually have some kind of puzzle element that you have to use your abilities to solve, and then you wail on them, and not of the ghostly screaming kind, the beat 'em up kind. Really, the gameplay as a whole, it's just a very basic, easy to understand beat 'em up where you just kind of mash the button over and over, and while it is easy to pick up and play, there really isn't much depth or variety with this game. The abilities don't really mix things up that much. There isn't much variety here. It gets pretty old pretty fast. Again, it's just incredibly shallow beat 'em up gameplay. There's no depth here. The levels do nothing interesting. Despite the background changing, they're all very basic, flat, and offer absolutely no challenge. A lot of the time, it's really just straight lines. You know, as a kid, I remember being kind of bored with this game, and even nowadays, I'm like, yeah, I can see why I was bored with it. The game just doesn't have much going on. It's, again, a really basic beat 'em up. I wouldn't say this game is bad, but I wouldn't really say it's good either. Like, the gameplay and controls are adequate, the presentation's fine, the setup is good, and I like the cutscenes and all that, but the game as a whole is just kind of middling to okay. and I very much think the other Nicktoons Unite games really improved on what this game set out to do. But as it stands, if you like Nicktoons, if you love 2000s games and you're looking for something to play that isn't total garbage, you could do a lot worse than this game. And here we have Nicktoons Battle for Volcano Island, which came out in 2006. This is the second game in the Nicktoons Unite series. Now, I remember as a kid seeing this game, playing a demo, trying it a little bit, but never actually buying it. I remember thinking, I didn't really care much for the first one. I think I'm going to skip this one. And it's a shame I skipped it because this game is quite a bit better than the original Nicktoons Unite. It has a unique setting and story, taking place as the title implies at this original location known as Volcano Island. It sees a couple Nicktoons characters being summoned by this old crab to come save the island and defeat their ancient enemy. The characters that show up here are SpongeBob, Timmy, Danny, Patrick, Sandy, and Sam. It is kind of weird Jimmy isn't a playable character. He's here and he talks to you a lot of the time, but you can never play as him. So yeah, fine enough roster, small but mighty is one way to look at it, but when it comes to the gameplay, it's incredibly similar to that first Nicktoons Unite game. The game is still fully playable in co-op, as there is a couple different characters you can play as, and you can switch between them whenever you want, and they still do have unique abilities and attacks, but the core gameplay here is still a beat 'em up with some platforming and the occasional puzzle solving, and sometimes you'll even have to collect stuff, but there is a bit more variety here. It's not as straightforward as Nicktoons Unite. There's a bit more platforming. The level design is not just these straight lines that are rather flat and basic. There's actually a bit going on here. Is it the most engaging? Is it the most challenging? Is it mind-blowing? Is it something you've never seen in any other game, let alone another Nickelodeon game? No, it is not. But there actually is some fun to be had here. Yes, the beat-em-up combat is just as basic as it was before. The platforming doesn't ever really test you or mix things up all that much, but there is more platforming here than Nicktoons Unite, and it does control okay. I mean, the controls are fine enough here. The basic puzzle solving and collectibles you get are fine little wrinkles they throw in to add to the variety and keep things a little interesting. There are some boss fights here, but yeah, it's really quite shallow. There are collectibles like I mentioned, and I would recommend you collect these collectibles or even try to 100% the game, as it's not very long at all. If you don't 100% the game, just rush to the end, you could probably beat this game in like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. If you collect everything, you'll get a solid 2.5 hours. At least the game doesn't get old, it doesn't get repetitive. I didn't find myself getting bored because it is really short. I mean, short but sweet, right? The pacing is actually pretty decent. It's got a nice flow to it, and by the end of it, I was like, you know what? I actually did enjoy my time with it. Yeah, it is really short, and most movies are longer than it, but at least it was an enjoyable experience that I can recommend to people who like Nicktoons. It's not going to rock your cock off. You're not going to be wowed by this game or go wowie zowie or anything like that, but it's a decent little experience that could have been a hell of a lot worse. And as a quick mention, I'm not talking about the handheld versions of these games, but I have heard good things about the Game Boy Advance version of Battle for Volcano Island. My boy Frame Raider did a video on it a while back, so you can check that out if you're interested. Anyway, on to the next game. And so here we have Nickelodeon Kart Racers 2 Grand Prix releasing in 2020. Now this game just kind of looks at the first one and improves it in just about every single area to be a much better game all around. Let's start with the biggest improvement. This game has a lot more content. The original game, it didn't have a lot of tracks, it didn't have a lot of characters, it didn't have online multiplayer, it just didn't have a lot of content. This game, it absolutely has a lot of content with 28 tracks and 30 characters. And when it comes to the character roster, it's actually kind of fire. We have all the characters returning from the first game, all the SpongeBob, TMNT, Hey Arnold, and Rugrats characters, but now we have the Loud House, we have JoJo Siwa, we have Rocco, Invader Zim, Ren and Stimpy, Avatar, Korra, CatDog, and Danny Phantom. Like I said, it's actually a decent selection of characters. There's no voice acting still, which is just really strange, but at least we have a lot more of these recognizable characters, so that is a big plus. I will say immediately also the tracks are just a lot better. There's a couple tracks returning from the first game, and it's kind of obvious which ones they are because they're just not as well designed. Like, they were okay at best, but the new tracks here, yeah, they're actually decent. I wouldn't say there's any bad ones, and it's fun to go through most of them, and there's a decent amount of fan service here. When it comes to the handling and the driving and all of that, it's a little better here. There's more items, and the items are definitely more useful than the first games, but the actual driving itself, yeah, it's okay. The cars handle decently. It does take a little bit of time to get used to it because it is so loose feeling. It still does feel casual. You can still go through all these tracks without drifting like at all, but I definitely would recommend drifting. It feels a bit casual, but it's okay. It's okay. It's a marginal improvement on the first games. It does not feel as sluggish or just kind of clunky as the first games. And then when it comes to all the content we have, you know, there is the local racing, there's like the Grand Prix, there's an actual challenge mode here with a bunch of different challenges to do. There's actually some interesting challenges here, but there is online multiplayer. The first game, no online. This game does have online, which is cool to see for such a clearly budget game. But I certainly never found anybody playing this game online, so that's unfortunate. But, you know, it's cool to say the game has online. Look, this game, it isn't going to wow you. It's not an amazing kart racer, but it's a fun little time with a bunch of your favorite characters. The presentation, it's a bit better than the first game as well. It doesn't look like they're just reusing assets. I think when this game came out, most people were just surprised that a second game even came out. But you know what we have here? It's decent. It's a decent little racer that is certainly better than the first kart racer and a big step in the right direction. And here we have SpongeBob SquarePants featuring Nicktoons Globs of Doom, which came out in 2008. Now, I very, very much remember getting this game back in 2008 when it came out on the Wii. I was really excited. I was like, this game looks really good. It looks way better than the old Nicktoons Unite. I think this is going to be great. And I played through it actually a couple times. I do have some fun memories with this game, but coming back to it, it's not exactly as great as I remember it, but I still think it is a decent little beat 'em up. I really do like the premise. I think it's one of the better premises for any Nicktoons game. It sees some of our favorite Nickelodeon characters and their respective villains coming together to take on the Morphoids, these like orange glob balls of crap creatures that take over some other characters, and yeah, they're trying to take over the world. So a couple characters and their villains team up here. I think the roster is decent enough. It is interesting. You get to play as the villains. I've always thought that was pretty cool, and the way they team up, yeah, I think it's got some interesting combos here. I enjoy the story for what it is. Look, the villain's pretty one note, but there is some good fan service here. Actually, there's even some great fan service, especially for Invader Zim at the time, who it felt like was just in limbo. But when it comes to the gameplay, this game is a very simple beat 'em up with some platforming involved as well. All of the beat 'em up combat is tied to one button. You really just press one button over and over to do all the combos. Every weapon does have a unique ability as well that is dependent on the character that mixes things up a little bit, but the gameplay for the beat 'em up combat, yeah, it's pretty simple. There are some different enemy types here that do mix things up. There's even some boss fights. In the boss fights, there's some good fan service here, like when Bubble Bass shows up as a boss. I like that, but I wouldn't say there's much variety with the combat, and the platforming is really standard stuff here. Nothing ever really is all that interesting. The level design is not all that engaging or challenging, but there are some interesting little set pieces thrown in here, and the game doesn't really get old. I didn't find the game getting repetitive or stale by the end of it. It did keep my interest all the way through. One reason it does that is it's not exactly very long, taking around 3 to 4 hours to beat, and as a kid I really enjoyed it. Nowadays though, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of glad it ends when it does, because it was just starting to get old, you know. Despite you going to different areas, I feel like these areas aren't all that different from each other outside of visuals. I feel like the game fails to really take advantage of the environments you get put in. Like, they could have done more with the levels, and at times it can feel a little generic, and it's probably my biggest issue with the game is at times the gameplay just doesn't really have a lot going on. It can feel kind of meh. At least from a visual standpoint, I think it's pretty good for 2008 being a budget game for the Wii and PS2. I mean, the models look nice, the worlds look decent enough. Sure, it looks a little flat environment-wise, but the frame rate's nice, and I like how everyone looks. I think the art style works. You can also play through the entire game cooperatively, but guess what? I couldn't get anyone back then, and I can't get anybody nowadays to play through this game with me. The final boss is actually pretty interesting. Won't spoil it, but I will say there's actually 2 different endings, which I always thought was really cool, and it's something a little different from the other Nicktoons games. Look, if you've played any of the other Nicktoons Unite games, you'll feel right at home here. It really isn't all that different. It's still a licensed kids game at the end of the day, and while I enjoyed and have some fun memories with it, I'm not going to say this game is great. This game is alright. It is better than the original Nicktoons Unite and Battle for Volcano Island, at least in my opinion, but I wouldn't say this is exactly peak Nickelodeon gaming. But if you like the Nicktoons, if you're looking for just a few hours of fun, you know, you could spend it in a lot worse places. And here we have Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3 Slime Speedway releasing in 2022, and I believe this is the best Nickelodeon racing game. This game really looks at the first 2 kart racers and just improves them in so many areas to be actually a pretty good racing game. Is it going to stand up to Mario Kart 8, and are people going to be flocking from it to play this game? Absolutely not. But what you have here is actually a good racing game with a bunch of Nickelodeon characters and fan service that I think most people can enjoy. Obviously, when it comes to the budget, when it comes to the presentation, it's not amazing for 2022. It's not going to wow you. The art style does look a little weird, and some characters just look off thanks to it, but it looks okay. Everyone looks okay for the most part. You can at least tell who everyone is. But the biggest improvement to the presentation is voice acting. This game actually is voice acting. The first two games did not, and it's good to hear voice acting here. It's good to hear a bunch of my favorite characters in any media talking. And they do talk a lot, and it can get kind of annoying, but I'd rather have him being annoying than what we had in the first two games, which was just silence. But what good is voice acting if we don't have good characters for it? This game has over 40 characters, making it the biggest roster of like any Nickelodeon game, and it's great. It's actually just really good, with a bunch of Rugrats characters, Ren and Stimpy he being here, Rocco's here, Real Monsters is here, Hey Arnold, Cat Dog, bunch of SpongeBob characters, Invader Zim, Jimmy Neutron, My Life as a Teenage Robot, Danny Phantom, Avatar, Korra, Loud House, TMNT, Garfield, oh hell yeah, even those weird new SpongeBob shows, and JoJo Siwa returning. But there's more choices to make before a race than just choosing your character. You get to choose from a bunch of different karts and cars here. You get to customize it just like Mario Kart 8. It really is just like Mario Kart 8 in terms of customization with different stats, bonuses, etc. And you have the pit crew characters. You actually get to choose 3 different characters to go alongside you that give you, passive abilities or buffs or items. And when it comes to the pit crew characters, there is a ton here. There's like 90 crew members, and these are where all the characters that aren't playable are hiding. Characters like Mr. Krabs and Plankton, or all the Loud House family, or Jimmy's dad, like the most important one. And it's cool to just see how many different Nickelodeon characters they really could cram into this game that aren't Fairly Odd Parents, because it's clear something's going on with Fairly Odd Parents. They're not in any of these games. And then we have all of the tracks. This game actually has a ton of tracks. There's a bunch of returning ones from the first 2 games, but there is a ton of tracks here, and I think these are the best tracks of the whole series. These are actually pretty decent, they're fun to go through, and the biggest thing, there's a ton of fan service. If you like these shows, oh, there's so much good representation here. It's really great, actually, especially for SpongeBob fans. There's a bunch of fan service to old SpongeBob, and if you love Nickelodeon cartoons, I really just think the game is worth playing just based off the fan service alone. So good selection of tracks, characters, fan service, but then we have the actual driving. It's a small improvement on the second game. Look, it doesn't feel amazing. It can feel a little awkward. It still is pretty casual. You don't even have to drift for most of these turns, but it could be a hell of a lot worse. It's not awful. It's not bad. It's not terrible. It's not amazing. It doesn't feel great. It's not super satisfying, but it's okay. The game has a good sense of speed to it as well. The best of the 3-kart racer games. And then a bunch of the items returned from the first 2 games. There's a number of new ones here. The items do actually help for the most part. I think it is a decent balance. It's not, amazing. There are kind of too many items, it feels at times, and I'm not sure what some stuff does, but it's decent enough. When it comes to the actual moment-to-moment racing, I think it's an enjoyable enough time. The game actually does have a decent challenge thanks to the crazy rubber banding AI, so at least it's engaging. I mean, rubber banding and kart racing just kind of go together, so I just really expect it at this point in time, but I mean, the game at least put up a decent challenge. There's a bunch of challenges here, actually. Well, on the subject of challenges, yeah, there's actual challenges where you get different objectives. You get a character chosen for you, a car chosen for you. And there's some good variety here, and there's, as usual, more fan service. There's also, the usual Grand Prix. There's actually a bunch of Grand Prix cups to go through in different difficulty modes. There's online multiplayer. There's actually people still playing this game online, which is nice. And yeah, there's actually a good amount of content in this game. I spent a lot more time with this game than either of the other kart racers combined, because this game, it just has a lot more content. There is a hell of a lot to unlock in this game. There's actually a ton of unlockables. You don't get a bunch of currency when you finish events or races, and so the game does feel a bit grindy, but I mean, there's a ton of content to unlock here. They really want to keep you hooked to it, and I actually did enjoy it. Out of all the Nickelodeon racing games, this is the one I enjoyed the most, and if I could only recommend one to you, it would be Nickelodeon Kart Racers 3. This game is actually pretty decent. Clearly, it's not for everybody, but I think we have a pretty decent racing game that I have no problem recommending if you like Nicktoons or Nickelodeon or love kart racers. And so here we have Nicktoons Attack of the Toybots releasing in 2007. This is the third game in the Nicktoons Unite series. Now, I remember playing the shit out of the DS version as a kid, but I never tried the home console version until I was going to make this video. And you know, this is probably the best of the Nicktoons Unite games. Now, when it comes to the setup, it's a little unique. It sees a bunch of Nicktoons characters coming together to take on the Toybots, these toy robots that were sent by Professor Calamitous of Jimmy Neutron fame. When it comes to the roster, I think it's pretty solid. We got SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, Tack, Danny Phantom's here. Timmy's actually here. I think this is one of the last games Fairly Odd Parents is actually in. My Life as a Teenage Robot shows up, Invader Zim, and then I remember in like the DS version, Adventures of Manny Rivera were also here. The roster is pretty decent and kind of unique from the other Nicktoons games. When it comes to the gameplay though, yeah, it's really not unique from the other Nicktoons Unite games. It's a pretty standard, run-of-the-mill beat 'em up with some platforming and puzzle solving. You can play through the entire game in co-op. There's always 2 Nicktoons per level, or at least most of the time, and you'll beat up a bunch of robots, do some really simple platforming. You'll occasionally get in these operational mech suits, and do some occasional minigames that try to mix things up. When it comes to the variety, I think that it's solid enough in this game. It's probably the best of all the Nicktoons games. The pacing is pretty decent here, the flow is nice, and when it comes to this game's length, it's maybe the longest Nicktoons Unite game, taking around 3 to 5 hours. It's like the same length as the first Nicktoons Unite. However, this game does have a bunch of collectibles, and these collectibles are great. There's a bunch of fan service here to really every Nicktoon, old and new. If you find yourself playing this game at all, I highly recommend trying to get all the collectibles, as you'll add a little bit more game time, but it really is worth it just to see all the Nicktoons get mentioned here, like all of them, even freaking Barnyard's here. But that is obviously a big question. Should you even play this game? Well, seeing how high it is on the list, I can say yes. I think the gameplay is decent enough. Look, the beat 'em up combat, it's serviceable, it's fine, the game controls fine, the platforming is okay, it doesn't really do anything all that interesting or challenging. It might not engage you for more than a few hours, but by a few hours the game is over. I would say it ends before it gets truly repetitive. The level design is okay, it doesn't do anything all that interesting or anything you haven't seen from the other Nicktoons Unite games, but I've seen a lot worse. Speaking of I've seen a lot worse, we have the presentation, which for a budget game in 2007 for the Wii, yeah, I think it looks okay. Look, it's not going to make you go wowie zowie or anything like that, but it's okay. The character models look okay, the art style, it works. And I thought the voice acting was decent. I like seeing the characters interact with each other. I think the cutscenes are maybe the best part of the entire game, to be honest. I did enjoy the cutscenes. What I think makes this game better than the other Nicktoons Unite games is I think it is better pacing, it's a more enjoyable experience, and I really did appreciate the variety. The levels, they try to do something a little different from each other. They don't all feel the same. Sure, it's nothing new to the platforming genre. They're not reinventing the wheel or anything here, but I think the levels are decent. And I like the somewhat unique character roster. Look, if you could only play one Nicktoons Unite game for some reason, you can only play one, even though all these games are available for free to download, but you're only able to play one, you should play this one. I think it's the best one. And if you like Nicktoons, I think you'll enjoy the game. You'll at least like the fan service. The fan service is good there. Is it a revolutionary, amazing title that is one of the best licensed games ever made? No, it's not that, but you can have a few hours of fun here. And here we have Nickelodeon AllStar Brawl, which came out in 2021. Now, when they announced this game, or when I heard just the initial premise of this game, I immediately sat up because I was like, hey, this could actually be pretty good, especially with a really awesome roster. And Nickelodeon's got plenty of great characters to make an awesome roster. And you know what? This game, yeah, I think it's actually pretty solid. I know there are plenty of people that don't really care much for it or don't like that it's a budget platform fighter or say it's just a Smash Bros ripoff, but I think if you look at this game for what it is, I think it's a pretty decent platform fighter and there's plenty of fun to be had with this game. Obviously, we do have the second one now, but that original game is nothing to scoff at either. I will also mention I played this game a little after release after there were some updates and they added some more characters. And speaking of characters, let's talk about the roster. The roster is actually pretty stacked. Like, this is probably the best roster of any Nickelodeon game, tied with Kart Racers 3. From SpongeBob, we have SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy. From Avatar, we have Aang, Korra, and Toph. From Invader Zim, we have Zim. We have Rocco. We have Reptar from Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy and Powder Toast Man. We have Oblina from All Real Monsters, Nigel Thornberry from The Wild Thornberries. From TMNT, we have Leonardo, Michelangelo, April O'Neil, and Shredder. We have Cat Dog, Danny Phantom's here, Helga from Hey Arnold, Hugh Neutron from Jimmy Neutron. Jimmy's not here, Hugh is, which 10 out of 10 right there. We have Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot, and then we also have Garfield. Yeah, this roster is really stacked. It's really good. I like the variety. I like the mix of old and new. Hugh Neutron being there is just fantastic. I like that there's some meme characters, some legacy characters, and characters that you have to include here. I think the roster is just really good. Now, when it comes to the fighting, it is a platform fighter. If you're not sure what that is, it's very similar to Smash Brothers, where you just got to knock them off the stage. And I gotta say, of all the platform fighters I've tried that aren't Smash Brothers, I really do think this game is one of the best. It's certainly better than Beautiful Joe Red Hot Rumble, I'll give it that. Is it better than Multiverses? Maybe. But there's a light attack, a heavy attack that can be charged, and a special attack. Of course, your characters have a few special attacks, and depending on the direction and the button input, means you'll do different attacks, all that fun fighting game stuff. And while we're talking about fighting games, I'll throw it out there. I ranked every single Capcom fighting game. Check that out, link in the description below. Thank you. Okay, so I've laid all this out for you, but how is the gameplay? How is the moment-to-moment combat and the fighting itself? I think it's good. It's not great. It is a little clunky. It is a little stiff at times. It for sure takes some time to get used to, and at times it certainly feels janky, but I've had plenty of fun with it. You know, once you get a good groove going, once you put a little bit of time into it, I think you really can enjoy it. Does it feel amazing? Is it super great and satisfying? No, but I think it still is good. It doesn't feel like total ass. It doesn't feel thrown together or really sloppy. It feels like some real effort was put into the fighting game mechanics. There's actually some tech here, and I can appreciate what they're trying to do here. Is it as in-depth as, say, Smash Brothers? No, of course it's not, but you do have to remember this is a Nickelodeon fighting game with probably a 50th of the budget. Speaking of the budget, we have the game's presentation. This is probably one of my bigger issues with the game, is the presentation is just not up to snuff with this game straight up. Like, even for a budget title, this game just does not look very good. It looks like a late PS3 title at best. The environments are really flat. The frame rate works, and I didn't have any issues there, but it really just doesn't look very good. The animation is also kind of wonky. When the game launched, there was no voice acting. They just fought in silence, and the sound effects were like okay at best, but no voice acting was just really weird, and I'm glad they added it over time, but it just isn't great when it comes to the presentation. This is one area where the sequel does improve things. Another area where the sequel improves things is the single player. In this game, we have, you know, like a regular arcade mode that every fighting game has, and then we have a sports mode. I never cared for this sports mode at all. It's very similar to Slap City. And then we have the online multiplayer. This game does utilize rollback netcode, and it seems fine enough for the few matches I did play online. I didn't have any issues, and so I'm going to assume, maybe I'm making an ass of you and me, but I'm assuming that the online multiplayer was fine. And I think the most fun you're going to have with this game is multiplayer. Look, to wrap things up here, this game, it's not an amazing fighting game. It's not an amazing platform fighter, but it still is a fun little time that I have no problem recommending to people who like fighting games, people who like Smash Brothers, and if you like Nicktoons. It's dirt cheap at this point, and they're still fun to be had with the game. At the time, this was easily the best Nickelodeon crossover game of them all, but that was then, and this is now. And here we have Nickelodeon AllStar Brawl 2 coming out in 2023. This is, in my opinion, the best of all the Nickelodeon crossover games, and just one of the best Nickelodeon games, period. I want to give a shout out again to the publisher for hooking me up with a review code, but trust me, that really didn't affect my judgment. This game, it is the real deal. It is a real improvement on the first AllStar Brawl, and they really did add a decent amount to this, and it's one of the best platform fighters you could play nowadays. Now, first off, I want to say this game clearly has a bigger budget. It looks quite a bit better than the first game. The animation is better. The environments don't look as flat. The game started with voice acting, and I think the voice acting is solid enough here. I wouldn't say it's of AAA or even AA quality. It's still clearly budget, but I think it is better than the first games. And when it comes to the gameplay, it's a clear improvement as well. It plays very similar to the first game with, you know, a light, heavy, and special attack, and then of course there's a bunch of different attacks and combos you can do. There's like a super meter. It's known as the slime meter, which is built up by attacking opponents, and it can be used in a couple different ways. You can actually power up attacks, you can extend your aerial recovery, you can perform attack cancels, you can push opponents away, and you can do what's basically a final smash where you just do this super attack. And I just mentioned a bunch of technical things, and it's really cool that that's actually in the game. Like, they really are aiming for depth here, and I'll just say the fighting is actually pretty good. It is way smoother than the originals. I think it just feels a lot nicer. It doesn't feel it's janky. It does have some janky moments, but doesn't feel anywhere near as janky. I think the new mechanics are good. Again, it adds to the depth. This game, it actually really does seem like it has the depth that the first one was lacking. There's a bunch of different combos, and it just feels nice, man. Maybe it's because it's the second one and I'm kind of used to how it feels now, but I think it feels a lot nicer than the first ones, and it can be really satisfying, especially when you hit those big heavy attacks. Like, shit is good. I think the fighting is really solid, and it's got some of the best combat you will find in any any platform fighter these days, in my opinion at least. When it comes to the single player, I think they've really beefed it up. They've really made it a lot better. There's obviously the arcade mode, but this game introduces a new story mode. It's actually really cool. It's like a single player roguelike campaign in which you gotta stop the Danny Phantom villain Vlad Plasmius from conquering the multiverse, because now there's a multiverse. You'll start in this like hub area where you can choose your character. There's even NPCs to interact with, and you can level up your characters and do a run. The runs in this game have you progressing through nodes that each feature different challenges and special rules, including these new areas where you fight just waves of enemies with a ton of fan service, platforming challenges, and of course boss fights. As you do these runs, you'll get currency that you can use to upgrade your characters, give them special abilities, and you'll get new characters to use as well. I really actually enjoy the roguelike gameplay. Sure, there isn't a ton of variety with some of these stages. Fighting the enemies is pretty basic every single time. The platforming challenges are really simple, but the boss fights are pretty good. I'm gonna give some credit to the boss fights. I actually do like them, but the biggest thing about this single player is there's a ton of fan service. I really enjoy all the fan service. In fact, just as a whole, Nickelodeon AllStar Brawl 2 has some of the best fan service you will find for anything Nickelodeon related in forever. Like, just taking a look at Squidward's moveset, I knew immediately that so much love and fan service was put into all of his moves, and just this game in general. Like, I really do want to give a huge shout out to the fan service. It's just so well done in this game, especially as someone who really loves almost all of these cartoon characters. Like, it was really great to see. The voice acting's good. There's plenty of callbacks, throwbacks, throwback Thursdays, throwback every day you play this game. It's so great. And you know, I mentioned Squidward. I haven't even talked about the character roster yet. The character roster is pretty good in this game. Is it better than the first games? I don't know about that. I think the first one might have a little bit of a stronger roster, to be honest, but the roster is still very good here. While a bunch of characters do return from the first game, they all have revised movesets, so everyone feels at least a little new. When it comes to the new characters, though, we have Angry Beavers from the Angry Beavers, Azula from Avatar, we have Donatello from TMNT, we have Ember from Danny Phantom, from Hey Arnold we have Gerald and Grandma Gertie. We have El Tigre, which I really didn't expect him to show up. We have Jimmy. It's funny that Jimmy wasn't in the original, but his dad was. We have Mr. Krabs coming as DLC, Mecha Plankton's here, Raphael's here, Rocksteady and Zuko are apparently coming as DLC, and Squidward. My favorite of the newcomers, Squidward. Squidward's like my main here, or Patrick. Squidward probably has my favorite moveset. Like, when I saw him slam down with the Marvel, I was just laughing my ass off. But yeah, all in all, I think the character roster is good. I like that there are still a couple meme and legacy characters, but I'm kind of disappointed some of the characters from the first game aren't here. Like, why is Cat Dog not here? Or Sandy? Or Hugh Neutron? Why can you not play as Hugh? Why? I don't want to get items from him in the single player. I want to play as Hugh. I think everybody does. This is ridiculous. But, you know, aside from that, yeah, the roster is good. I enjoy the single player mode, and then we have the online. The online seems pretty stable so far. It uses rollback. I haven't had any issues with it, and I've had plenty of fun online, and plenty of people show me that I have no idea how to play this game. Okay, at least in a competitive sense. I would like to believe I have some basic understanding of the gameplay. Something that I also give a nice shout out, there is crossplay. That is very cool. Did not expect that. Big thumbs up for me. Crossplay is always great. Yeah, the multiplayer seems solid enough, and I hope this game actually really sticks. I know the first game didn't really stick all that much, and that's why we got a sequel 2 years later, but I'm hoping this one sticks a little longer. I think there's more depth. The fighting is better. There's a great single player mode here. It has some really cool bosses, excellent fan service, truly just excellent fan service, and a higher budget. Yeah, I think that this game is a no-brainer if you like Nickelodeon, if you like platform fighters, if you like fighting games in general. It's a big no-brainer. I have no problem recommending the game, and I'm really glad I played it. This is probably one of the most underrated games of 2023. And I'm glad to end on such a high note. You know, with so many Nickelodeon games, most people expect all of them to be ass, but there's some real hidden gems here and some good ones, like AllStar Brawl 2. And that's where we're ending the video. So hope y'all enjoyed it. If you made it to this part of the video, comment pineapple, as in what SpongeBob lives in. Yes, pineapple. That's the code word we're going for. That means you made it to the end of the video. You get a heart from me. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, share with someone you know, because it took forever to make this video. Not trying to sound e-baggy out here, but I am a team of one, so any support really is greatly appreciated. Playing all these games, researching, ranking them, scripting, audio, editing, etc. It's all me, so thank you for all the support. Hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July, whatever the nearest holiday is to you. See y'all later. Bye-bye.